Good morning to you again, and welcome to this next in my series on the means of grace, the means by which God gets through to our hearts and souls. A friend of mine, speaking in church about his conversion to Christ, said that when he used to bring home a bag of cement from the stores at the Waterboard where he was working, that he always felt bad about it. He wished that he had brought home 2 bags because it was so easy to steal one. That's the fundamental problem with conscience. It doesn't say the same thing to everyone. Nevertheless, it is a gift that God has given to every human being, regardless of race, culture, and upbringing. Paul recognized that conscience is active in the lives of ordinary people the world over, not just in the lives of people of faith. He describes how people have an internal sense of right and wrong. This is what he says: the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them. There isn't anyone who doesn't have this experience, who hasn't had a conscience given to them right from birth. What happens to that conscience as they grow up varies from person to person, but everyone experiences comments and observations from that inner voice. All of us know what it's like to have our conscience pricked about something that we have said or done. It's interesting that we use that word pricked too. If I prick my finger, it hurts. It's unpleasant. I try to avoid it from happening. It isn't a particularly pleasant experience to have our conscience stirred up. We try to avoid it. In fact, it can be so unpleasant that some people spend large amounts of money on therapists and life coaches to try to silence the voice of conscience. Conscience is actually a gift from God, and it is intended to remind us that we are moral beings living in a moral universe which has been created by a moral God. The very existence of our conscience points in the direction of a creator God, and even defines his character to some extent. A God who is interested in how we live and behave. As a gift from God, then, it is useful and sensible for us to listen to our conscience as a moral guide and compass in our decision-making and our life choices. The Baptist preacher Spurgeon, for his part, described the human conscience as a garrison planted in a rebellious town by the great governor of the world. That's very insightful. Our conscience has a twofold responsibility. Firstly, to remind us of what is good and right. It looks forward. It is anticipatory. It asks serious moral questions. Cowardice asks, is it safe? Expediency asks, is it politic? Vanity asks, is it popular? But conscience asks, is it right? That's what conscience is for, to make us question our decisions, our plans, and our actions. But secondly, conscience is reflective. It looks back at what we've done and makes moral comment about it. This is what we saw in operation in the life of David. He was running for his life from Saul, who was king in Israel at the time. David is hiding now in the back of a cave when King Saul comes into the same cave to relieve himself, not knowing that David is hiding in the darkness. Whilst Saul relieves himself, David secretly cuts off the corner of his garment. He could have murdered the man then and there. He doesn't do that. But when he has cut off this piece of cloth from Saul's clothing, his conscience strikes him. He has raised his hand against the Lord's anointed. It isn't until after he has done the action that he feels the seriousness of what he's done. So often it is afterwards that our conscience kicks in to tell us that we have done wrong, and it invites us to do something about it. Now, our conscience is not infallible, and we should recognize that. It's not infallible because we are fallen people, fallen from our original innocence. Our fallenness affects and infects our conscience as well as everything else about us, which is why different people come to different conclusions about what is the right way to behave. The film series, The Crown, has been made by some very talented people, writers, producers, actors. But I was discussing this new series with a Christian friend a couple of nights ago, who said that he did not feel that he could watch it, partly because it was difficult to discern the difference between what is fact and what is fiction, but more particularly because it exposes the failures and weaknesses to public view of people who are still alive. Now, some will watch the series without any qualms of conscience. Others won't watch it because of conscience. Conscience can be very unreliable. Worse than that, it can become hardened and numb. Paul describes people whose conscience has been seared with a hot iron. Scar tissue has lost its sense of feeling. It's entirely numb. That's how my friend's conscience had become when he stole the bag of cement. Some years ago, a missionary was trying to explain the meaning of a conscience to a Native American. Back came the reply, "Yes, I know what my conscience is. It's that little three-cornered thing in here," and the man laid his hand on his heart. "It stands still when I'm good," he said, "but when I'm bad, it turns round and round, and the corners hurt very much. But if I keep on doing wrong, by and by the corners wear off, and it doesn't hurt anymore." A conscience that has become numb. In some cases, though, completely the opposite kind of thing happens, and some people develop an oversensitive and weak conscience. In the early church, there was a big conscience issue. It had to do with eating meat. It wasn't a debate about vegetarianism, but about eating meat which came from the pagan temples. When an animal was taken for sacrifice, they didn't burn the entire carcass, only a small part of it. The rest was given back to the worshipper for the family to eat or for it to be sold. Some of the Christians could eat that kind of meat with a clear conscience. No problem at all. Others were saying, "Yeah, we can't eat that because it's been offered to an idol in a pagan ceremony." This conscience issue was causing a division of opinion and behavior in the church. "We can't eat it, and you shouldn't eat it either," some were saying. Now, in one of his letters, Paul gives some detailed guidance to the church as to how to resolve this divisive issue. Now, if then conscience that God has given to us is fallen and fallible and can send out mixed messages and be numb in some cases and weak in others, surely we'd be better off without it. Not according to Bishop J.C. Ryle. He described that conscience is the best friend that a preacher has in the congregation when he is delivering his sermons. Blind and mistaken as conscience often is, he writes, blind and mistaken as conscience often is, unable to convert a man or lead him to Christ, it is still a most blessed part of a man's constitution. The awakening of conscience is one of the things which brings a person to Christ. And once it has been awakened, it's one of the signs that a person has come to Christ. A friend who was running a food takeaway business would never have thought of giving a meal to a homeless person on the street until he came to Christ himself. He was surprised by the new compassion that he found in himself after he had become a Christian. In defending himself in a court of law, the Apostle Paul said, "I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man." How is he going to do that? And how are we going to do that? 4 things. The first is that we must educate our consciences from the Bible. Some of us didn't have a very good upbringing. Maybe we were taught to lie, to manipulate people, to cheat, to steal, to look after number one, to be unforgiving, judgmental, merciless. We learn these kind of behaviors from within the family and by the example of others around us. We need to engage in a re-education program as we read the Bible and learn from its pages what is right and what is wrong. We need the external, objective standard of the Bible, and we need to use it as a plumb line by which we measure the accuracy of our conscience. Nothing else will do. We need to listen to the opinion of God about human behavior, not to the opinion of society around us. The second thing that we should do is to give careful attention to the voice of our conscience. It's possible that it may be misinformed, it may be oversensitive, but it may just be that the Lord is using it to bring back to mind something from the past which needs to be dealt with, some reconciliation which is necessary, some apology which needs to be made, some forgiveness which needs to be offered. If you're finding that your conscience is niggling you, then perhaps it's the Lord who is calling you to resolve something from the past which has never been fully dealt with. Thirdly, we should aim to maintain a good conscience. We've heard of a fallible conscience, a numb conscience, and a weak conscience, but it is possible to have a good conscience. How? Listen to Paul again. If it is possible, so far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Choose peace in the family. Make peace with all. Fourthly, keep your conscience clean. We do that by coming back again and again and again for forgiveness and cleansing. Not only is our conscience fallen, but we are fallen. Mark Twain said that man is the only animal that blushes or needs to. Let's come back again, blushing, red-cheeked from our failures, to receive God's forgiveness and set out again on our next adventure with Him. May it be so. God bless you, and Amen.